Hello, I'm Tom Scholey and I'm here at the lovely Lindholme Lakes today doing a spot of margin fishing. I want to talk to you first of all about this, the Middy M3 MK II pole that I'll be using. Now the version I've got here is 11.5 metres. There is a shorter version available as well, and there's also an extension available to take it to 12.5 metres, but I'll cover that in more detail a little bit later. So first, let me look at what's changed between this, the Mark II, and the original M3 pole. It's the G-Pulse fibres that make this pole different. Basically, it's lighter and stiffer than the previous model. Pleasingly for those who own the original M3, it's also built on the same mandrel, so it's fully interchangeable with the old model. So what do I like about it? Well, there's a few features that I think are really good. First of all, it's supplied with pre-kitted with a reinforced puller section, and it's a lovely smooth internal groove, that is. That puller works really nicely. There's no catching, there's nothing on the inside that's rough, which I have seen on other poles in the past, and it feels a super strong top kit. And let's be honest, this is where you want the strength, because it's this point where you're going to really be pulling to get those big munter carp up to the top where you can net them. It isn't supplied pre-bushed, this top kit, which I actually think is quite refreshing. Everybody now puts PTFE bushes in the poles, a lot of manufacturers do, but if you like anything like me, you want to choose the PTFE that you use in your pole, so I quite like the fact that you can select that yourself. I've put one of the Drennan internal bushes in here, and that fits absolutely snugly with no need for gluing. There's also a white top kit supplied with the pole. This is called the Shadow Zero, and it's got a lovely smooth finish, and most importantly this matte white coating. So if you're an angler who maybe likes dobbing fish and believe that white top kits stop you from spooking fish, this is a lovely added extra as well. And again, it comes with that lovely pre-drilled puller groove on there. It's worth saying the whole pole is rated to a 30+ elastic, so it's super strong. But what really impresses me about this, because there's a lot of great margin poles out there, let's not deny it, what I like about this one is the smoothness of the feel. It almost doesn't feel like a margin pole at all. It's got what Middy call a slick slide finish. It flies through the hands, really smooth, and to be honest, with the lightness and stiffness added in, it's as if you're fishing with a standard flagship pole. That's how light and stiff and well it performs at 11.5 metres. The M3 Mark II also has a 12.5 metre extension available. This is available separately, so obviously if you're at a venue where maybe you need to fish a little bit further, you can buy the extension. Like the rest of the pole, this feels super strong, but also slides through the hands beautifully. One other feature I want to mention quickly, for optimum performance, the sections do feature alignment arrows, which helps you get the backbone of the pole really lined up nicely and give you that optimum performance. Also available is some short half butts that fit in the 5th and 6th or the 6th and 7th sections, depending which one you go for, and they just offer that little bit more confidence if you're sat fishing down the edge and you're going to give it the big one on the strike. So let's talk about margin fishing and what we're going to do here today at Lindholme Lakes. I've been asked to give you my top 5 margin fishing tips for summertime bagging. So I'm going to start with the pole and with the elastic. Now, a lot of people think just because you've got a lovely puller facility on a pole that you have to use it. Well, I'll be honest, when it comes to edge fishing for big fish, I'd rather not be using that too much. 2 reasons for that. First and foremost, if you're on a light elastic, the fish can charge off, go all around the lake, and you stand a chance of being snapped or snagged up. Secondly, if you're puller kitted every time you come to land a fish, you're putting an awful lot of wear on this elastic, so it's going to cost you more money in the long run because you're going to be replacing your elastic all the time. So when it comes to edge fishing, when you know you're going to be using big strong lines, use big heavy elastics, because that allows you to really control the fish, get them in quicker, and also it'll save you money in the long run. So in this I've put the Preston Dura 17 hybrid elastic. Now, one thing about how I set this, which I think is important, is it's a heavy elastic, but I've set it really soft, so it only just creeps back into the pole. And the reason I've done that is when you hook a big fish, A, you're not going to bump it. More importantly, the fish is probably going to swim out your peg without splashing, because that's the one great thing about the light elastics. If you're using, say, a white hydro in autumn or winter, or when you're using lighter lines, obviously you hook the fish, it swims out your peg. But by setting the elastic quite soft, when you hook the fish, it still swim out the peg, but then obviously you've got all that lovely power in reserve when it comes to the netting stage. Right, so tip number 2, and we're sticking with the theme of tackle. The key to edge fishing is confidence, and the only way you get confidence is believing that every fish you hook is going to end up in the net, and that comes down to the tackle that you use. So we're talking positive, strong tackle for summertime bagging. Obviously in winter or spring, when the water's cooler and clearer, we might have a little bit more finesse, but this time of year we need to land what we hook and land it quickly. I've left a nice 2.5 foot gap between the pole tip and the float, and the reason for that is it allows me to put the pole on the bank so there's no shadow reflecting on the water, and I've just got the float in situ next to where I'm going to be fishing, so that the pole's completely hidden from the fish. So we've got 0.19 line, positive 17 elastic. Pole float choice is 0.3 gram, which is about, I don't know, we're probably fishing in 3.5 foot of water there. And because we're fishing big heavy hook baits, and I'll talk about that in a while, and we don't have to worry about really pinning it down. If I was fishing with baits like maybe maggots or worms or casters, I'd probably fish a bigger, heavier float for the same reason, because I really want to nail that bait to the deck. But fishing like we are today with baits like corn and big hard pellets and big fuka bait, we're really nailing that to the bottom by the weight of the bait itself. So 0.17 mil hook length, same theme, strong. Slightly lighter obviously than the main line, so if we do hook Moby Dick in its tail, it's going to snap the hook length, not the elastic. But the key is both super strong and a size 14 hook. Tip number 3 is all about baits, and specifically hook baits. Now, I used to be a big believer when I was edge fishing in fishing with little baits like casters and hemp and maggots and drawing a million fish into the peg, and that is a great tactic at times. In fact, I want to talk about that in my next tip. But my go-to approach nowadays on commercials, especially lakes like this, like Laurel's Lake here at Lindholme, where we know there's loads of fish present, my go-to tactic is to fish big hook baits and big heavy feed baits now, to really pin them fish to the bottom and make them as easy to catch as possible. So, if it's a venue you don't know very well, but you know there's a lot of carp and F1s in there, as a starter for 10, why not go with simply 8mm pellets. These are Lindholme's own fishery 8mm pellets, and on the hook you could either fish a banded 8mm pellet, these work brilliantly, baits like corn are great, or I've got here today some of the Fuka Fat Boys. These are just a big 10mm soft hook pellet that you can put on. You can even mould them into bigger shapes if you want. The whole idea though is it's something heavy that's going to go down and sit on the bottom, and you're only actually going to get a bite when a big fish sucks that bait in. It keeps everything lovely and clean, so you hook the fish that come in your peg and they stay pinned to the bottom all the time, so you're not getting line bites or foul up fish. It's just a really good, clean way of edge fishing. And on venues that are full of fish, it's the most stress-free, hassle-free way of catching them. So tip number 4 is about if things maybe aren't going to plan, and maybe big baits aren't working, you're not really catching fish. And these are some little tips that I picked up many years ago from John Arthur, who at the time was winning everything when it came to commercial fishing, and working with him he showed me a couple of absolute pearlers. So I'll give you the best one first. One of the deadliest edge baits on hard pressured venues is these old leftover casters. They look horrible, they're black, they smell, they're manky, but you chuck them in, I can guarantee you even the most wary carp will often home in and eat them. But you have to be careful if you're going to do that. You have to do it in shallow enough water to allow you to present a hook bait tight against the banking, because if you do it in deep water, often fish will waft the bait everywhere and you'll end up foul looking fish. So if it's a hard pressured venue, try feeding casters. And the other two baits that work ever so well in similar situations is ground bait and micros. Now, ground bait's my preference. I'll use this above micros where it's allowed, but obviously a lot of venues nowadays don't allow ground bait, so venues like Decoy, for example, you're left with the option of using only micros. But mix them fairly wet, fairly sloppy, so when they go in, you know you're going to hug the bottom as best they can. And again, fishing as shallow water as possible when it comes to fishing with these two baits. Hook bait wise, over the top of smaller particles is two baits that work particularly well for me. One is sweet corn and the other is the old faithful dendrobinas. All three of these on a big size 14 hook. These work an absolute treat. They're just great. The only thing I'd say about dendrobinas, if you're going to put one of those on the hook, make sure there's not a proliferation of perch in the venue, because we've all had days when perch take a liking to worms and you can't get in to the carp because perch are always snapping your bait. So if you're feeding particles, micros or ground bait or casters, fish over the top with baits like corn, worms. Dead red maggots are great as well, and you should find that even the wariest carp are easy to catch. So tip number 5, and this is all about where to fish. I'm going to give you two key areas that I've found absolutely deadly when it comes to margin fishing over the years. The first, my preference, is in front of the pallet next door. Now the reason that's such a good area to fish is it's where the keep nets are normally in from matches. It's an area that's clean normally, it's gravelly, there's no roots because it's well worn out with anglers dragging nets out, etc. It's normally a lovely flat area, and it's got the added advantage that you can often lay your pole on the platform, so hide the shadow of the pole from any fish that are in the area. So plumb up next to the platform next door. Now depth wise, ideally obviously in summer you'd find less than 2 foot. Often on venues that's impossible, but you can still catch fish here by feeding in the way I've described with heavy baits like 8mm pellets or the Fuka Fat Boys. I'm going to feed down to the left hand side today with 8mm pellets, fish an 8mm pellet or a Fat Boy on the hook, and we'll see what we're catching that depth. If that doesn't work, or if it's a venue maybe where there aren't any pellets and you want to catch some carp, it can be absolutely deadly to fish tight to the banking. This is where depth of water is absolutely paramount though, because if you're fishing too deep a water, you'll have all sorts of problems, because banks along areas like this where you've got a few rushes or bushes in the side, they're often not as even as they are up to pallets. You've normally got bits of roots, you've normally got reeds sticking out in the water, all sorts of things that can make presentation difficult and make the fish tricky to catch if you've not got that nice clean bottom. So try and find a nice shallow bit of water. In the height of summer as we are at the minute, personally I think 12-14 inches is absolutely perfect for big carp. Again, you can't always get that perfect depth, but that's what I look for. And a nice flat spot or a gentle slope. Key thing is though, if you're going to fish in shallow water, bulk your shot together and pin it to the bank, fish a slightly heavier float, and you should find that big carp are easy to catch. I hope these few tips have helped you with your edge fishing. Get out there and bag yourself some carp.